What if I told you there's a law school change coming in 2026 that flips the whole system on its head, and most applicants still have no idea it's even happening? And this is not the rankings or some new law school admissions trend. I'm talking about the thing that controls everything else: how law school gets paid for. Because starting this year in July, the federal government is putting hard limits on how much students can borrow for graduate school. And if you understand what that truly means, you're going to see something that most people miss. This is not some small policy tweak, it's an entire market reset. It changes who can afford law school, how schools set tuition, how scholarships work, which schools struggle, and how risky the entire mindset of just borrow it becomes. So today I'm going to break down what's actually changing in 2026, why it matters more than almost any admissions advice that you're hearing, who gets hurt, who benefits, and which schools are most exposed. I'm also going to share how to think about your law school plan like an adult with a calculator, not a consumer getting sold a dream. Now, for years, law school financing was brutally simple. It wasn't easy, but it was simple. The school posts a cost of attendance that can be wildly high, and students cover it with federal loans. Historically, the logic went like this: you borrow some standard federal government loans, and then if there's still a gap, you fill the rest with Grad Plus loans. And Grad Plus basically allowed you to borrow up to the cost of attendance, meaning the school says law school costs X, and the system says to you, okay, here's X. And when that's the environment, tuition behaves in a very predictable way, not based on what education should cost, but based on what schools believe students can pay, which for a long time effectively meant whatever the federal government would finance. And that's how you get to the modern reality where a student can look at the total cost of attendance that's the size of a mortgage and still feel like, well, that's just what law school costs because the money's been there and it's been too easy to get it. And when borrowing's easy, people stop asking whether it's worth it, financially worth it. Not like you've always wanted to be a lawyer and your parents are proud of you, but whether it's actually worth the return on the investment that you're getting. Now, starting later this year, the rules change in two major ways. First, Grad Plus goes away for new borrowers, and secondly, there are now hard caps on federal borrowing for grad school and other professional programs. So here is the simplest way to see it. If you're going to law school and your total annual cost is higher than the federal cap, there's a gap. And the government is no longer automatically filling that gap with unlimited Grad Plus borrowing. So instead of the school setting the price and you borrow it, we shift to the government sets the max and the school has to justify the rest. And that one change forces a harsh reality into the conversation because the numbers that floating around that matter most for law school are these. For professional programs like law school, the federal annual cap is $50,000 per year with a $200,000 lifetime cap for professional borrowing. The takeaway is law school counts as a professional program and that cap is real. And so if your law school's cost of attendance is, say, $85,000 a year and the federal max is $50,000, you've got a $35,000 shortfall or gap every single year. And across 3 years, that's $250,000. And this changes everything because when you cap borrowing, you change behavior, you change incentives, you change who can say yes. So first, tuition becomes real. Prior to the change, schools could post a high sticker price and still fill the seats because students could just finance it. But when that cap hits, students start doing math, and law schools hate when you do math because then you're actually measuring whether it's worth it. So schools then get forced into making one of three moves. They can cut the price, they can increase scholarships, or they can accept smaller classes. And there are problems with each one of those options. And if they can't do any of those, the schools themselves get put into a pretty shaky position. Then the scholarships become less about merit and more about closing that gap between the cost of attendance and what you can borrow. Now, scholarships aren't just generosity on the parts of law schools, they're a pricing strategy that are used to shape medians for US news rankings. And when borrowing's capped, scholarships start getting used for a new purpose of making the program financeable so you can actually afford it. In other words, even schools that never wanted to discount much might be forced to. Because if enough students say they can't make it work, the school has a real problem. And then outcomes and return on investment start dominating the conversation. When it was easy to borrow, schools could say, we've got a beautiful campus, we have clinics, we're in a great city, you're going to have a great network, and all of that's cool. But when the money starts to get tighter, applicants start asking tougher questions like, what percentage of graduates get JD required jobs? Or what are the typical outcomes for the majority of the class, not just the top 10%? What are the bar passage rates? Are the scholarships conditional? How many people lose them? And that's why the American Bar Association 509 reports and employment outcome data matter so much, because applicants are going to start reading the fine print. Now, many people hear loan caps and immediately assume it's going to hurt only lower income students. Now, the students who got crushed hardest under the old system were the ones who didn't have lawyers in the family, didn't have financial guidance, didn't understand how to evaluate law school outcomes, and they were the most likely to trust the law school's marketing. But now, loan caps are functioning more like a blunt form of consumer protection because they force that question earlier of, will this realistically pay off for you as the student, as the consumer? Because when the federal lending stops covering everything, you've got to dig into your savings, go for private loans, work while you're in school, or rely on family. And of course, private loans are not a great substitute, which means you've got to deal with real credit checks. You've got to deal with a cosigner, worse rates, higher interest, fewer protections, and less flexibility if your income isn't what you hoped it would be right away. And private lenders are pricing in risk. And so if a school has weak outcomes, a lender might decide, we don't like this bet, or they're going to offer terms that are brutal. And so, yes, some students are going to use private loans, but they are not a clean replacement for unlimited federal Grad Plus borrowing. And the moment law school requires private underwriting to attend, the entire population that can attend law school is going to shift. And that is a real structural change. Now, let's talk about the students that feel this first and hardest because of the math. The most exposed schools tend to be the high-cost programs with limited institutional money, the schools with weaker employment outcomes, schools that relied on filling seats at high sticker prices, and schools where many students already borrow close to the full cost of attendance. Because when the borrowing is capped, net tuition revenue drops, enrollment drops. And once that happens, everything gets harder. And once a school's numbers start sliding, you get a ripple effect, a domino effect, a cascade with smaller class sizes, tighter budgets, fewer resources, weaker employment outcomes, and lower bar passage support. This is not going to happen overnight, of course. It's more of a slow squeeze. And so some schools will shrink, some will merge, some will close down. It's just basic economics. Now, here's the trap I want you to avoid as a student. A lot of applicants are going to respond to all of this with one of two extremes. One extreme is law school is over, it's impossible, it's broken, it's done for. The second extreme is none of this applies to me personally, I'm going to figure this out later. But that's also not a plan. The right response to these changes is calmer and sharper. You've got to treat law school like a financial investment with uncertainty. It's an investment, and you got to look at whether the return is going to be worth it based on the cost that you're paying. So when you're looking at a school in the new era, I want you to look at 5 big questions and write them down with numbers associated. First question is, what is the total annual cost of attendance? Not tuition alone, but also factor in fees and living expenses. Schools love to spotlight the tuition and hide everything else. You don't want to fall for that. The second big question is, what is the realistic federal borrowing cap for my situation? If the cap is below your annual cost of attendance, you have a gap, so name it. Third question is, how will you cover the gap? And you want to be specific here. Is it savings? Is it family support? Is it work income? Is it scholarships? Is it private loans? And if the answer is, I don't know, that's a red flag. You've got to be able to answer that question. The fourth question is, what are the typical outcomes for students at this school? Not the superstar outcomes, but the typical ones. And this is where the ABA 509 reports come in handy. You got to look at employment outcomes, JD required roles, bar passage rates. And the fifth question is, what happens if I don't get the outcome I'm imagining? So if you graduate and you're not making the salary you were hoping for, what happens to your finances? Can you still pay your rent? Can you still afford to live? Can you still move? And the answer is, I'd be stuck. That's going to matter also. So here's what I expect you're going to see as this shift hits in real time starting this fall. You're going to see more guaranteed scholarships and tuition offset programs as schools try to bring tuition closer to what you can finance. You're going to see more aggressive scholarship negotiation and competition. You're going to see more scrutiny on conditional scholarships as applicants get smarter. You're going to see a bigger split between schools with strong outcomes and schools with weak outcomes. And you're going to see more applicants optimizing for debt to income ratios, not just prestige. So bottom line, law school changes this year because the financing model changes. When federal borrowing gets capped and Grad Plus loans aren't there to automatically fill the gap for new borrowers, the entire system has to adjust. Schools will adjust their pricing, they'll also adjust their scholarships, and the risk will be harder for applicants to ignore. And the applicants who do the best in this new era are not the ones who have the most anxiety. They're the ones who can do three things. They get the best LSAT scores they can to create options and leverage. They evaluate schools using outcomes and costs, and they build a plan that works even if life goes a little bit off script. That's how you win in 2026, with clarity and with numbers, with the data, doing the homework. And if you'd like my help getting the highest possible LSAT score to get more scholarship money, reduce your cost of attendance, take on less debt, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. And if you find these kinds of lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. And so I do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing this on your socials, sharing this in Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats. And so I see someone's asking for the link. It's in my bio on TikTok and IG if you want to book that free tutoring lesson with me. Now, I see a lot of questions came in. I will get to as many of those as I can. And so feel free to keep them coming. Just drop them in the chat, and I will help out as many folks as I can. Appreciate your support. So let's see here. Claire's asking, what's a good LSAT score? So good is all relative, right? I typically define good as above the medians of the schools to which you're applying, and ideally above the 75th percentile of the school to which you're applying for the best outcomes for the most scholarship money. And the lower your GPA is, the higher you want your LSAT score to be to compensate for that. You'd be a so-called splitter applicant with low GPA, high LSAT. Totally fine, by the way. Law schools actually weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. And so better to have a low GPA and a high LSAT than a high GPA and a low LSAT. And of course, no reason not to have a high LSAT score because you can always retake to get a higher LSAT score. The median LSAT score is roughly a 153, I think, but I would define good overall as being roughly 165 or better. So Randy's asking, is a 170 good score, a good score on the LSAT? Roughly speaking, yes, a 170 is a good LSAT score. That puts you in the top 4% of applicants. But if you wanted to go to a top 14 law school, one of the best, like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and so on, you should know that their LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. And so a 170 would actually put you on the low end of the medians and you'd want to ideally have a 175 to be competitive at those kinds of schools. I see a question here asking, do you think states like Texas and Florida no longer wanting to be associated with the American Bar Association will affect graduates? So it is true that Texas and Florida both are saying that they are going to start accrediting law schools without the American Bar Association, but the path forward on that is not yet quite clear. And so I think the safe course of action would be to still go to an ABA accredited law school in the short term so that you also have more flexibility for employment upon graduation. Because who's to say whether you'll stay in Texas your whole life or stay in Florida your whole life? What if you want to move? What if you want to get admitted to the bar in another state? If you might want to relocate due to family or whatnot, you'll have more optionality with an ABA approved law school to sit for the uniform bar exam, for example. I see Shannon's asking, will the changes with the federal loans, the Grad Plus loans, will they apply to those entering law school in 2026, 2027? So generally, yes, they will. If you are a new borrower, they will affect you. And so you want to be careful about taking on the loans and see what loans are actually available to you as someone entering law school with the new loan or financing regime. So do the homework first before you accept an offer of admission. Figure out how you're going to pay for things first. And if you can get scholarship money to close that gap, it may not be a huge issue for you. And of course, the best way to get the scholarships is by getting a higher LSAT score to compensate. I see Ragu Sauce is saying you don't need a 170 plus. That is a toxic narrative this community has created. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to have a 170 plus, but it's relatively better to have a higher LSAT score than to have a lower LSAT score. I hope that's not controversial to say. I mean, better numbers are by definition better, right? And of course, if you have a higher GPA, you may not need to have as high an LSAT score as you otherwise would need, but you'll have better outcomes with a higher LSAT score and a higher GPA than just a high GPA. Law school admissions is primarily numbers driven, right? So the better your numbers, the better your outcomes are going to be. If you have a 4.0 GPA, you might be able to get away with a relatively lower LSAT score, but your outcomes will not be as good as if you had had a 4.0 GPA and a 175 LSAT than if you have a 4.0 GPA and a 160 LSAT. And of course, what is good or what is needed is always relative to the particular school. And so you might want to have a 4.0 GPA and a 175 for a top 14 law school to get in. If you want to get a full ride at a lower ranked law school, you might also want to have high numbers like those. But if you're just trying to get into a top 100 law school, then yeah, having a lower number on both LSAT and GPA might be sufficient. But the better your numbers, the more scholarships you'll get. And with the new loan changes, you might want to have the high numbers regardless so that you can get more scholarships, pay less in tuition, take on less debt. And so Gritty Fairy Godmother's asking, are there scholarships available for law school? Yeah, there are. But merit scholarships typically come down to having higher numbers relative to the medians of the school that you're applying to. And so if you can apply to a law school with both an LSAT and a GPA above the medians and ideally above the 75th percentile of the schools that you're targeting, you will have relatively better outcomes to get more scholarship money. And the reason schools offer you those scholarships is because they want your numbers to help them raise their standing in the US News rankings. What happens is law schools report the highest LSAT score and GPA of their entering class to the American Bar Association. US News then pulls the data from those ABA reports for inclusion in the US News rankings. And the other factors like essays and such are not quantifiable. And so they're not factored into the rankings in the same way. And of course, law schools can see those for context, nice for them to look at, but it's not driving the rankings in quite the same way. I see Delilah's asking, if I graduate undergrad in 2028, when should I plan to take the LSAT? And so hypothetically, if you want to go directly from undergrad into law school, you might want to apply to law school in fall of 2027 to start law school in fall of 2028. Now, if you want to apply in fall of 2027, That means you could take the LSAT anytime between now and then. You have really a year and a half to take the LSAT, and so you might want to take the next 6 months or so to study for it. Take it this fall, then potentially you're planning ahead, you could retake it in the spring if necessary, work on your applications next summer, and then hit submit when they open a year and a half from now. And you can move all of that earlier if you want to. You don't need to spread it out over quite such a long period of time. Your LSAT score is good for 5 years, and so you could potentially knock out the LSAT this year if you wanted to, and your score will still be valid. So I always recommend taking the LSAT when you'll have the time to study, when you'll have the time to achieve your fullest potential. A lot of folks try to knock this out in 2 to 3 months, but it really takes, ideally, you're giving yourself 5 to 6 months to achieve your fullest potential on the LSAT. And so for anyone who's just starting their LSAT prep now for the first time, I'd probably recommend that you take it in August for your first take, just to give yourself a solid 6 months. You could aim for June as your first take, though, in 4 months, then take it in August as your retake as a backup. And retaking is totally fine. I recommend that everybody retake at least once, just because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, but rather they only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record. Just scanning through for other questions here. Thanks for all these coming into the chat. Jess is asking, what motivates you to help future law students? Thank you for all your help in these tips and resources. And of course, I appreciate it. I'm glad that you're finding them helpful. I mean, I've been personally teaching the LSAT for the past 20 years, and I increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. The problem is that it took me an entire year to get there, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I had done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months, because ultimately, the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And so I majored in political science back when I was in college. And so after I got my score, I started helping out my friends who were also pre-law, also applying to law school. And they'd buy me dinner. We'd go over some questions together. Then I started helping friends of friends, and then it grew into a thing. It snowballed over time. And so now here I am 20 years later still doing this, and I love it. And what I found is that the LSAT's a lot more interesting than people give it credit for at first glance. And it's also a very conquerable test, meaning that you can beat it. It's not a test of memorization. It's not a test of how smart you are. It's a test of how much you study for it and how well you can spot the patterns. And so I honestly get a lot of fulfillment out of helping people disentangle and deconstruct the LSAT, help them see the patterns underlying the questions. I think that it's not as bad as people give it, as people think it is. It's not a dumb exam. It's not like it doesn't test anything important. I think it actually is an important test. I think it's worthy of respect. And I think that it's related quite well to a lot of what you do in law school and as a lawyer. Of course, doesn't mean that the LSAT is it dictates whether you will be a good lawyer or whether you will succeed in law school, but being able to navigate difficult, dense text, being able to interpret the logic of the arguments and see the gaps and flaws in them, I think that's a valuable skill to build, and you can build it over time. I think that society, politics in general would be better off if people were better at evaluating arguments, seeing the flaws in them. There are certainly a lot of flawed arguments out there in the world right now, and I think we need to empower more people to spot them and avoid falling for conspiracy theories and things of that nature. And so if you can understand logic, I think you're going to be a more empowered citizen. And it's a useful skill to build in general, but of course, more narrowly, the skill that we're building right now is just help you get a higher LSAT score, help you get into better law schools, help you get more scholarship money, help you set yourself on the path to career success. Ideally, not take on tons of debt and then be forced to go into big law upon graduating law school. I wish that more people who were public interest minded could actually afford to pursue public interest like they would like to be able to do. But that requires taking on less debt when you're entering law school so that you're not shackled by the debt and forced to take the highest paying job you can get upon graduating. And so I think all else being equal, better to get a higher LSAT score, not to go to a top 14 necessarily, but perhaps if you want to, go to a lower ranked school, get more scholarship money, and then pursue the career that you really wanted to do all along. But of course, nothing wrong with taking a higher paying job if you got to be able to support your family. And so I'm not dogmatic about what you do with your degree. I just want to help you get the best possible position for yourself. I think that you know best what you want to do with your legal career. And so my role is just to get you the highest possible LSAT score. However, we get there, we can do it through one-on-one coaching, small group coaching, on-demand video courses, personal study plans. We offer all of the above at LSAT Unplugged. And if you want to talk through your options, help craft your plan of attack, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I see a question. What about using the military to pay for law school? Yeah, so there are folks who are able to get the military to pay for their law school, and I think that's great. If you can get someone else to pay for you, then by all means, go for it. We've had students who went that route in the past. I see Adbar's asking, I got a 172, but I'm considering an MBA. Should I apply for a dual degree JD MBA or just go JD first? That's really your call. I mean, if you have a 172, you're probably going to get into some pretty great law schools if you have a good GPA as well. But talk to admissions, see what they say, see what programs you get into, and of course look at what your career goals are. I mean, why do you want the JD MBA? What kind of options are you looking to open up for yourself? We've had students in our program do the dual degrees, but you may not need it. And consider, of course, how the limits on grad plus loans, the limits on federal government loans for grad school are going to affect your ability to pay for that dual degree or that JD MBA. Panda X says, I applied to 32 law schools with a 145. I hope that one of them says yes. Well, what's your GPA like? I'm curious. I mean, a 145, to be frank, is a below average LSAT score. So I understand why you applied to a lot of different schools, but I think that if you had, okay, you said you have a 3.8 GPA, that's pretty good GPA, but imagine if you had a 155 LSAT score or a 165 LSAT score, how much better your admissions odds might be. I mean, with a 3.8 GPA, you might get into some schools even with a 145, but they're going to be lower ranked schools. You're going to pay more in scholarship money. You're going to be taking on more debt than you otherwise would. If you don't get offers that you like, even with applying to 32 schools, don't be afraid to just walk away for this cycle. Retake the LSAT, reapply in the fall with a better LSAT score, you'll have better outcomes. It might be worth waiting a year just to give yourself better outcomes. I mean, law school is a 6-figure investment. You might be paying $250,000 for it, all said and done. And with the federal loan changes, it's not as if you can necessarily rely on federal government loans to take out to pay for all of this. Tina Time saying, how do I get up 10 points in 5 days? I don't like to make outlandish claims or promise overnight success. 10 points in 5 days is a little bit of a tall order. If you're 10 points below where you want to be, you might be better off just holding off on taking it this week and taking it in April instead, just to give yourself more time to achieve your fullest potential. And keep in mind, by the way, that students often drop 5 to 8 points from their practice test to the actual exam. And so you want to have a buffer built in. So you're saying 10 points, but you might actually need 15 to 18 points higher to get to your goal, given what you're actually aiming for. So see where your practice tests are going into this. Consider that maybe you might need to retake in April or June, and maybe register for one of those dates just for peace of mind, so that you have that in your back pocket, knowing that it's not all riding on this one LSAT test date. That being said, of course, last minute things to work on. If I had very limited time and I want to get my score up really fast, I would focus on the higher yield areas. The 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. I'd focus on those specifically. If you're unclear on any of those, if there's a gap in your understanding on any of those might be the areas that you focus on in the short term. There's also reading comprehension to work on as well. Then there's also pacing and time management, doing individual sections and full length exams to build up your endurance. And so if you've done all of that, great. But if you feel like you've neglected any of those areas, those would all be indications pointing to giving yourself more time. We like students to have done at least 10 to 15 full length timed exams before the big day, so that test day itself feels like just another run through. If you haven't cleared up necessary assumption, inference, and flaw, if you haven't got a solid approach for reading comp, if you haven't worked on pacing and timing, if you haven't worked on endurance, all of that would indicate that you're leaving points on the table by rushing it for 5 days from now. And you might be better off just giving it another 2 months till April, 4 months till June. If you were going for April, we would put you in a more intensive boot camp style program where you get live coaching 7 days a week. If you're taking it in June instead, we could take a more relaxed approach, give you a day off or two per week so that you don't burn out, more of a slow and steady approach. And of course, with April or June, you're better off applying this fall to start law school in 2027, but well worth the wait to get yourself a higher score. And the benefit of applying next cycle early rather than this cycle late is that there's more scholarship money available. It's a bit easier to get in, more seats available. February is not too late for this cycle, but it's the tail end. And so this is the last test date I would go for this cycle. Scanning through for more questions here. Maria's asking, is it possible to go from a 146 to a 160 in 6 months? Yeah, definitely possible. That's a very reasonable increase to look for over a 6-month time frame. Really, in 6 months, anything's possible if you're willing and able to put in the work. That seems to me more of a slow and steady, easier approach, frankly. 6 months from now, you take it in August. You can then get your score back at the end of August and apply that the second application's open in September. To me, that's really an optimal schedule, I would say. It's the ideal. And that gives you plenty of time to cover every section, every question type. And so I divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is building a foundation, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Pacing is doing individual timed sections to work on your pacing, how you allocate your time over the course of the section with that 35-minute time constraint. Then endurance is doing full-length timed practice tests so that you're not getting fatigued by the end of the exam, that your performance is not dropping in section 4 just because it is section 4. And so to Van Mop's question about building a study schedule and maintaining work-life balance, if we had, say, 6 months, I would recommend for you our LASER approach. A LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. And it's the cornerstone of the schedules that we build for our students inside our coaching programs. The way it works is we devote maybe 1 month to foundational work. That means for some folks reading textbooks or better watching course lesson materials. A is for accuracy, which is drilling questions by type. There's roughly 15 different types of questions in logical reasoning, for example: strength and weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. There's also reading comp to work on. Then S for individual sections. That's the time management, how you allocate your time over the course of the section, when you flag questions and skip them and come back later. E is for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests, and R is for review. And so with 6 months, maybe you spend a month on learning the foundation, a month on drilling questions by type, 2 months on individual sections for pacing, 2 months for full-length exams, building up your endurance, and of course, R for review, which is done using the Socratic review method, essentially root cause analysis, getting down to the bottom of what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again. And of course, in our coaching programs, we personalize the LASER approach to your weak areas, your schedule. If you're working full-time, then of course we'll have you do more studying in the evenings, on the weekends, maybe before work even, maybe during lunch. maybe after work. If you're in school and you don't have class on Fridays, we'll have you do some LSAT prep on Fridays. If you have the leisure to do nothing but study for the LSAT full time, of course, then we can give you more work to do given your availability. And we personalize every program for the individual student, considering your current LSAT score, your goal score, and when you're taking it. And then we craft a plan of attack to get you from here to there over that time frame without you burning out. And so if you want to talk through particulars, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio. We could talk through it more. Happy to meet with anybody watching this now or later to help you craft that plan of attack. And I see DJ's asking, I'm taking the LSAT this Saturday. So good luck, DJ, by the way. You're asking, should you go ahead and sign up for the tutoring now or wait till you get the score? So I guess my question is, you're taking the LSAT this Saturday. Are you currently scoring at or above your goal score? If you are, great. Maybe you're done with the LSAT for good. If you're not scoring at or above your goal score, then there's a decent chance you're probably going to want to retake. Like I said before, students typically drop 5 to 8 points from their practice to the actual. And so you want to have that buffer in place, meaning if you wanted to score a 170 on the LSAT officially, you want your practice test average going in to be a 175 or higher. If it's not, you might need to raise your baseline just so that you have that buffer, and the assumption by default is going to be you may need to retake in April or June or beyond. And so I'd say book the call with me. We could talk through the plan of attack to get you to your goal score on your retake whenever it might be. I see Drew's asking, if I'm applying for the fall of 2027, meaning I'm guessing you want to start law school in fall 2027, is taking it in September too late? That'll be my first time taking it. No, September is not too late. Totally fine. You could take the LSAT in September of 2026 to start law school in fall of 2027. That is totally fine, not too late. You take it in September, scores come back at the end of the month. You can then apply the same month that applications open. That's, if anything, it's on the earlier side. It's a totally fine course of action. Got a question you're asking, is it better to take a gap year after undergrad and work, or just apply straight from undergrad into law school? It's really up to you. Taking a gap year is fine. Going straight from undergrad into law school is also fine. It's really entirely your call. So I guess the question is, what do you want to do? Are you confident that law school is right for you? And do you want to go straight? Or do you want to maybe work for a year, save up some money, explore whether law school is what you truly want to do? Law schools aren't going to care a whole lot one way or the other. Also think about, can you get good letters of rec from professors, or do you need some time to cultivate other recommenders? Is your undergraduate GPA fantastic, or do you want to get some work experience to offset the GPA and put some time and distance between your undergrad GPA and your applications? Or do you want to take some time during senior year to raise your GPA so that your GPA will be higher and you can show more of an upward trend before applying? All just food for thought, and the answers to those questions, of course, will help determine whether you should apply now or later. Daniel's asking, I got a 165 and I'm retaking in April with a goal of 175. What should I do to advance? And so you want to improve 10 points in 2 months. Very reasonable goal. I guess the question is, what are your weak areas? Do you have a sense of where you're struggling? Are your issues accuracy, or are they timing related? Have you taken enough full-length practice tests? Have you reviewed your mistakes in depth? Have you been using the official LSAC Law Hub software to get more familiar with what LSAT test day is going to be like? Whatever you've neglected so far, that might be the area to devote your study time over these next 2 months. And if you want to talk through the particulars and help troubleshoot what the gaps are in your prep so far, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio, and we could talk through it more. But usually folks will either spend too much time drilling questions by type and not enough time doing full practice tests, or they'll do nothing but full practice tests and not spend enough time building the fundamental understanding of the different sections, different question types, getting the fundamentals down. So whatever you've neglected, you focus there. That alone could unlock the score increase. And if you haven't gotten support, if you haven't gotten any personalized feedback, once we add that into the mix, there's usually a pretty quick score boost to be had, meaning there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, because when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so once we add that expert guidance into the mix, we can usually get you at least 5, 10 points. And over the next month or two, for sure, there's a lot of untapped potential there. I see Rand is asking, if I retake the LSAT and get a lower score, is that bad when it comes to applying to law schools? Not bad, not really. I mean, law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record, which means there's not really any downside to retaking the LSAT. If you do better, great. And if you don't, no big deal. Of course, I'm not just going to say take the LSAT over and over without studying in the hopes of hitting a 180 by luck alone. Doesn't work that way. But let's say hypothetically that your goal score was a 170, you took it officially, and you got a 170. You could say, great, I'm done, I got what I deserved, which would be true. But what if you retook and through luck alone, you scored a few points higher? Now you're applying with a 172, 173. If you score lower, the 170 from before still counts. So giving yourself another at-bat might not be a bad idea. And I'm not saying, of course, that you should delay your applications another 2 months just in the hopes of doing better. But if you were taking it in April as your first take and June as your second take, or June as your first take, August as your second take, you wouldn't be delaying your applications at all, because applications open in September. So you can still apply just as early either way. So yes, to Stormy's question, only the highest LSAT score is considered. And that's because only the highest LSAT score on your record is reported to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls their data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. And that's a change only taking the highest score, by the way, that goes back to 2006. And so prior to 2006, they took the average of multiple scores. They no longer do. And the LSAT's also gone from being offered 4 times a year to being offered 8 times a year. That's also been incentivizing more retakes as well, because it's more convenient. And so there's always another LSAT test date around the corner in just another month or two. Coming up, we've got February in 5 days or so. We've got April in 2 months, June in 4 months, August likely will be offered as well in 6 months. And so I'm not going to promise anything overnight for those of you taking it in February. Good luck, by the way. I have a video coming up for last-minute LSAT test day advice coming out on the YouTube channel in about an hour and a half. And so check the YouTube channel for those of you taking it in February. The link's in my bio, by the way. But for those of you taking it in April or June or beyond, there's a lot that we could do to get your LSAT score up, get you more scholarship money, get you into better schools, help offset the increased debt you may be facing with the elimination of the Grad Plus loans. And so if you want to talk through how to get your score up in the next few months, you can book that free LSAT tutoring with me, and we could talk through your particulars. And Rand, glad you're loving the channel, by the way. Glad it's helping. I see Stormy's asking, I'm studying for about 11 months, doing 5 questions per day. Will this suffice? 5 questions a day isn't really a lot. I mean, that's spending, what, 10, 15 minutes under timed conditions at most. I'm curious when you're planning on taking the LSAT ultimately, and what your current score is, what your goal score is. I mean, if you're just kind of dipping your toes in the water, 5 questions a day over a very long period of time is a good way to get familiar with the exam little by little. But to really make steady forward progress in your prep, I like to see students putting in at least 5-10 hours a week at minimum, just to get some momentum going. But if you've got the LSAT coming up in a couple years, if you were a freshman or sophomore in college looking to take it as a junior, that's fine, of course, better than nothing. But when you're really looking to get serious about this, I want you to put in at least 5 hours a week to really get some momentum and really get into the world of the LSAT a bit more because you don't want to get rusty on this. It's a test of pattern recognition. You build the skills over time, but there's a lot to familiarize yourself with, right? So there's roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, and then there's reading comprehension as well, and all different sorts of methods of reasoning. And the more that you can familiarize yourself with them, the better you're going to do. So if you're early in the process, it's fine. It's better than not doing it. I think it's great, but I would want you to up it and increase it more and more over time as you approach your test date. So with more context, I could say whether it's good or not for now, but I do want to see you ramping it up as you get closer. I see Curiously Curious is asking, I'm planning on taking the LSAT in April. Is that enough time to retake and get a better score in June? So the answer is yes. You can definitely take it in April for a first take, retake in June. April gives you 2 months. June gives you another 2 months beyond that. That's a good plan. Then you can do that and apply in the fall. So if your senior year is this fall, you can apply then, of course. And by the way, your score is good for 5 years. So no rush. You're planning ahead. I think that's great. I see Vanessa's asking, is it unreasonable to plan to take the April LSAT? No, I think April's a good target. I guess the question is, where are you currently scoring and what's your goal score? You can make a significant improvement between now and the test in April, but of course, significance relative. Can you improve 50 points in 2 months? Maybe not. Can you improve 10, 20 points? Definitely. That's certainly possible. More times better, of course, but we work with what we got. If you take it in 4 to 6 months for June or August, we take a more relaxed approach. If we take it in April with only 2 months, we do a more intensive approach. And so with the boot camp that we run for the April test, for example, for folks on shorter time frames, we give you live coaching 7 days a week from now till the test. That would be 3 private one-on-one sessions every single week that you schedule whenever is best for you, any time of day, any day of the week, along with 4 semi-private small group sessions each week. And those are Monday through Thursday in the evenings, but they're all optional and all recorded for any that you can't make so that you can watch the videos later if you can't make it live. And so with 7 days a week, you're getting live feedback literally every single day from now till the test, but there's still some flexibility built in. We found that's what works best to get folks the maximum score increase in a shorter time frame. But if you go for June or August, we can take a more relaxed approach with more days off. And if you want to talk through that particulars, of course, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio on TikTok and Instagram, and we can talk through it more. See a question asking, I'm a senior interested in becoming a lawyer. How can I start to prep early on? So the first thing I would do is take a practice test on LSAC's Law Hub platform. That's the official LSAT test makers. And so they give you 4 exams for free on the platform. You get the rest of them with a Law Hub Advantage subscription, $120 a year, well worth the investment. And that cold practice test, of course, will just give you a sense of where you're currently at. Don't over-index on it as being indicative of your true potential on the test, just as a snapshot of where you're at right now, and lets you know what you need to put into this as a benchmark from which to measure your later future progress. Then you build a foundation in the different sections, different question types, do some timed sections to work on your pacing, pull it all together with full exams as test day approaches. But to start with just 1 cold practice test for free on the LSAC Law Hub platform, best place to get familiar with at the start. I see Curiously Curious is asking, can job shadowing strengthen my application as far as extracurriculars or character to where they would consider a lower GPA? Okay, so I guess you're asking, can you offset a lower GPA with job shadowing or extracurriculars? I think that a better approach would be to focus, if your GPA is subpar and you're below the medians on the GPA, I think the better approach would be to focus on your LSAT score, because they weigh your extracurriculars and resume less than they do your GPA. So focusing on a third factor, or the third most important thing, will not offset the second most important thing. You got to focus on relatively more important things to offset something like GPA. So LSAT is the number one most important factor in admissions. GPA is number two. Everything else is a distant third. And so I would strongly recommend you focus on your LSAT score to offset the GPA. That would make you a so-called splitter applicant, which is fine. Law schools love splitters, and they want to focus on the metrics, right? So job shadowing, internships, volunteer work, none of that is a quantifiable metric, and so it will not do a lot to boost your odds. Of course, better to have it than to not have it, but because we all have limited time, you want to focus on your time investment on what's going to give you the most return, which is going to be your LSAT prep. Now, if you've already maxed out your LSAT, if you've hit a 180, then of course don't spend more time on that. But assuming that you're not above the 75th percentile for your LSAT score, I would say you're going to get a better return by boosting that up first before you focus on extracurriculars. If you already have the LSAT and you already have the GPA, then of course focus elsewhere. But until you've done that, LSAT number one. And oftentimes I find that folks are looking at these soft factors as a distraction or a procrastination from what is really going to move the needle, which is the LSAT. Maybe not what you wanted to hear, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it because nothing less would serve you. We got to focus on getting you the LSAT score first. And so if you're not there yet, so that you mentioned that you're planning on April and June, right? So let's get you the score there first, and then we can switch gears once you've locked down that LSAT score. And so if you haven't already, you can book the free LSAT lesson with me, and we could talk through getting you the higher LSAT score. That's going to be the number one thing I'd focus on to start with. Thanks for all the great questions, folks, by the way. Please keep them coming. And if you're finding these lives helpful, by the way, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. And so the more you can share this to your socials, the more you can share it in your Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats, it really does help a lot. I do appreciate it. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions coming in. Anything I might have missed? Folks asking for book recommendations. I don't really typically recommend studying for the LSAT out of books because they're often outdated, and the LSAT's changed a lot in recent years. So a lot of these prep books are going to focus on logic games, for example, which have not been on the LSAT for a year and a half now. A lot of the ones on Amazon actually have fake reviews and are written by AI, and they're really just frankly garbage books which contain mistakes and are unrealistic. And so I would avoid a lot of those like the plague, give those to your worst enemy. Better to study online since the LSAT is now online, and anything online can be updated more frequently, more quickly to reflect the latest LSAT changes. I mean, aside from the removal of logic games a year and a half ago, you have the inclusion of a second scored logical reasoning section. You have more formal logic, conditional logic, numbers and percentages related questions, these sorts of mini logic games that you see in the logical reasoning section now. You also have the change to reading comprehension last month where LSAC removed the dual or comparative passage for some test takers without warning. And so the LSAT's changing all the time. They're probably going to start scoring the writing sample in the next year or two. And so your books are not going to mention these sorts of things, but online resources will. And so given how fast things change these days, I typically recommend studying online with courses and classes that are more up to date given the format changes. I see Dialect Today's asking about the different LSAT question types. And so if you go over to my YouTube channel, linked in my bio, I actually have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel covering every LSAT question type, both logical reasoning and reading comp. Just click the videos tab on the channel or search the channel, and you'll see if you search, for example, flaw or assumption or strengthen or weaken or reading, you'll see in-depth lesson videos covering every single conceivable LSAT topic. And so you can go in there on it for a deep dive on the different question types. And then, of course, for more personalized support, we have our coaching programs as well, and we'll help you focus on your weak areas, whatever those might be. I see Fahad is asking, I have a baseline LSAT score of 142. How much can I improve? Well, I mean, really, Fahad, the sky's the limit. I mean, how much are you willing to put into this? Meaning how many hours per week, how many months, and then what LSAT score do you need given the schools that you're targeting? I mean, in a way, goal scores are silly because there's no reason ever to shoot for anything less than a 180. So you've got potentially 38 points to improve from a 142 to a 180, but you may not need to improve to a 180. As long as you can get above the 75th percentile of the schools that you're targeting, that may be enough. And of course, the lower your GPA is, the higher you want your LSAT score to be in order to compensate for that GPA. If your GPA is great and you're good on that, fantastic, just match it with a killer LSAT score and you could get great law school admissions outcomes. Now, the more of a score increase you want, the more time you want to allow to improve your LSAT score. And so, can you hit a 180 by April in 2 months? Maybe, maybe not. More time would be better, of course. Can you hit it by June? June increases your odds significantly. Can you hit it by August? Even better. And so I'd say if you're at a 142 now and you want a 170 plus, maybe April's a little bit too soon. Maybe you want to give yourself more time, but don't deny yourself, of course. Just put in the work. Like I mentioned before, if you wanted to take it in April, we would take a more intensive boot camp style approach. If we go for June, we take it a bit more relaxed. So consider, what other obligations do you have right now? Are you working? Are you in school? Do you have family obligations? The more time you can put into your LSAT prep, the faster you can get there. And also look at, are you applying this cycle that's finishing up now or starting with this fall? If you have more time that you can put in, the higher you can improve your score. And if you haven't already, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally over Zoom video. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video, in my bio, in the chat. Happy to help. In terms of hours per day, I typically recommend at least 2 hours a day if you're working full time, maybe more on the weekends if you can. And if you're not working full time and you want to study for the LSAT full time, then of course, maybe 4-5 hours per day. I wouldn't typically recommend more than that because I don't want you to burn out. And it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? The LSAT, you don't cram for it, you build the skills over time. And so fewer hours per day, more days per week is better, all else being equal. And you give yourself a day off here or there so that you don't burn out. So if you haven't already, anybody watching this an hour later, book the free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.